Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Hi.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Lovell, Library Director here at the Franklin Public Library. I'd like to welcome you to our Great Decisions program tonight on U.S.-China relations. Our program is sponsored by the Franklin Public Library Foundation with financial support from the Jerome J. and Dorothy H. Holtz Family Foundation and Carol and Tom Donovan. Our speaker tonight is Rick Rocamora, the former Vice President and General Manager of Cooper Power Systems in Shanghai, China. I'm going to turn it over to Rick.
Can I ask a quick question? Are you having a makeup talk?
Oh, yes. I was going to mention it afterwards, but I'll mention it now. The program that was scheduled for March 12th that got snowed out will be not next week, not next Wednesday, but March 26th, the following Wednesday. And that will be Pablo Torral.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. All right. Our topic tonight is for Great Decisions is China. Every year they have some topic on China. It seems like the United States and China can't figure out how to get along, so we always have something to talk about each year. So anyway, I think I'm going to introduce. I'm going to try to follow the article pretty closely. It's in the book. Has anybody had a chance to read the article? Okay, it's forgiven. It's kind of. I had to read it 3 times to understand it. It's kind of slow going. Yeah, they don't write these things for easy reading. But the article goes through foreign policy, starting with the Obama administration, through I think the Biden administration up to Trump 2.0. It kind of stops at Trump 2.0, and the question is, what's going to happen next? So they review the policies that have been enacted along the way, and one of the things you'll see is that we're not real consistent in our foreign policy, which I think it's unfortunate. So the article starts with some introductory questions, and the first question is, should the United States decouple from China? What that means is, should we stop trading with China, stop political interaction, limit foreign visitation? Should we just break off like we were before 1972 when we didn't have diplomatic relations with China? That's one possibility. Or should the U.S. upgrade its relationship with Taiwan and end strategic ambiguity? Has everybody heard that word before, strategic ambiguity? That's a diplomatic term, and what that means in terms of our relationship with Taiwan, we are very clear to Taiwan that if you get in a jam with China, we're not going to defend you. We might defend you, and we might not. It's kind of ambiguous, because if we tell them we got their back, and some hothead in Taiwan declares independence, they can drag us into a war with China. At the same time, we want China to know we might defend them, and we might not, so China doesn't want to attack Taiwan. That's what diplomats call strategic ambiguity. That's been a key part of our policies between ourselves and China and Taiwan. And a lot of this discussion is going to center around what's going on with Taiwan. The next question is, should the United States work to influence the policy orientation of the CCP, which stands for the Chinese Communist Party, through diplomatic engagement? In other words, we become friends, influence them, and try to get them to modify their behavior. That's been very much a policy, especially in the Clinton-Bush years, which are preceding what we're talking about now. Should the United States resign itself to confrontation until fundamental changes occur in China? These are questions that are posed in the Great Decisions book. When I conclude the presentation, I'm going to put the slide up again and ask you to answer those questions, because that's what Great Decisions is about. We're all supposed to participate in foreign policy decisions. And finally, what will Trump's policies be to China? What will Trump 2.0 mean for United States-China relationships? I'm not going to try to answer that question, but we'll go through a lot of stuff tonight. And again, maybe we can answer that at the end of this discussion. let's go back to the beginning of modern relationships between the United States and China, which is the Shanghai Communique of 1972. You recognize those two guys up there? Okay. One's Henry Kissinger, and the other one is Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai was Mao's foreign minister. He's highly respected in the diplomatic world as being a really smooth diplomat. He's educated in France for a few years, and he's pretty famous. And so these two guys are both real highly thought of in the foreign policy world. And they came up with what was called the Shanghai Communique. This is a master document in ambiguity. So this part, translated from Chinese into English, is the Chinese portion of the document. And the Chinese portion is that China policy is a one China policy. Taiwan is an internal affair of China. Their viewpoint is that Taiwan is just another state like Wisconsin in China, and no other country has the right to interfere. Well, guess what? Henry Kissinger signed that. The United States sort of ratified this document. So we supported this document. Now in English, our wording is, this is where the constructive ambiguity comes in. All Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain that there is one China, that's the one China policy, and Taiwan is part of China. And we affirm the United States interest in a peaceful settlement of the Taiwan question by the Chinese themselves. So it gets peaceful reunification. That's our position. So no military takeover. So the Chinese agree to that. But even I understand there's different wording. The book talks about this, how you would translate some of the Chinese words into English. I even looked up some of the translation of that to see how they were translating it. So that's where we're at. And this has been the basis of our relationship with the one China policy. There's another communique later under Jimmy Carter, which was created led to the diplomatic recognition of China, and then under Ronald Reagan, having to do with the Chinese were complaining that we're sending too many arms to China. So we're at ultimately 3 communiques between China and the United States. So we're just going to stop right here and move on. So if you look at this map talks about island chains. This is called the first island chain. This is called the second island chain. The first island chain goes through Okinawa, Taiwan is included in it, goes on the edge of the Philippines and goes through the whole South China Sea. And the second one goes through Guam and some of the outer islands. The United States policy is to basically keep China bottled up within the first island chain. So we use it, for years we used the Navy. We actually used to sail ships down the Formosa Straits between Taiwan and mainland China, control the seas to keep the Chinese out of this area. This is our turf. And the basic contest between the United States and China is that China's trying to push out here, and we're trying to keep them bottled up here, at least militarily. That's the basic source of tension between our two countries. So I have a question for you. How would we like this? Remember the Monroe document 200 years ago? We wanted to keep the European powers out of the Americas. How would we feel if the Chinese were patrolling the Caribbean island, the Caribbean Ocean, to keep us out of that area? And in fact, if you remember the opening days of Trump 2.0, Rubio was sent to Panama. And the reason he was sent to Panama was to get the Panamanians to divest of Chinese investment in the Panama Canal. They forced a sale where the owner, it was a Hong Kong investment firm, in the last couple of weeks sold their assets in the Panama Canal zone to BlackRock, the United States' big financial investment company. So we were really trying to force the Chinese out of our sphere of influence. That's what was going on. It's pretty serious stuff. So here's Taiwan, which is the center of a lot of the contention between the two countries. And it's a beautiful country, and it's pretty close to China. And it's also only about 67 miles from southern Japan and 73 miles from the Philippines through the Luzon Strait. It's very strategically located. And Taiwan has a long history. It wasn't always part of China. It was settled by Aboriginal people, Australasian people that migrated across the Pacific, same people that have their roots in the Philippines. And they controlled the country. And then eventually Chinese immigrants started moving across here in the 1600s. But it really wasn't until the end of the middle of the Qing dynasty in the late 1600s that China actually claimed Taiwan. Before that, they made no claims for Taiwan. And there's a long history about Taiwan if you're interested. But we're just going to summarize it tonight. I'm going to give a talk at OSHA in a couple of weeks. It's going to talk specifically about Taiwan. But, you know, it has 245 miles long, 80 miles wide. It's comparable to the state of Maryland. 23 million people live there versus 6 million in Maryland. Very dynamic economy today. This is where Chiang Kai-shek's armies fled to escape the communist armies in, when the People's Republic of China was set up in 1949. It's a dynamic place, and there's a big movement in Taiwan to declare themselves independent from China. Now, historically, the flag here is a flag of the Kuomintang. That's in Chinese for the National Party. The Nationalist Party wanted reunification with China. They always pledged that they were going to go back at some point and reconquer China. But now, the new generation in Taiwan claims that they're Taiwanese. They're not Chinese. The Mandarin is the main language, the primary language in Taiwan. And they are threatening to call themselves Taiwan. Now, just a simple act of changing their name from Republic of China, which was the old Chiang Kai-shek government before the People's Republic of China, to Taiwan could cause a war. That's how a simple thing like a name change, that's how tense this situation is. Well, Taiwan has turned in from a dictatorship under Chiang Kai-shek and then his son Jiang Jing-kuo to a democracy. When Jiang Jing-kuo died in 1988, he was replaced by a Taiwan-born person, Li Tengwei, who brought a democratic system to Taiwan. And of course, the United States likes that we have flourishing democracy. It's our policy to claim we want to promote democracy around the world. So he was in power for this period here, almost 12 years. And then he was replaced by a man named Chen Shui-bian, who was a dissident opposed to Chiang Kai-shek and wanted Taiwan independence. Well, the Chinese and the mainland did not like Chen Shui-bian becoming the president of Taiwan. So, but he stayed on for sorry, I'm learning how to use this thing. Oops. He stayed on for 2 terms, 2008, and then he was ousted. And as we planned, this is during the time I was living in China. I remember they had elections in Taiwan, and to vote if you're a Taiwan citizen, there's no absentee voting. You have to vote in Taiwan. So we had a number of Taiwan employees in our operation in Shanghai, and they all went back to Taiwan so they could vote in person. And they were all KMT people. They were supporting KMT's the Blue Star. They were supporting Ma Ying-jeou. And the Chinese kind of like the guy because he believes in one China policy. He does not believe in a separate Taiwan. So relatively speaking, we start the Obama period with a guy who's not going to rock the boat too much in East Asia. That's how we we have a flourishing democracy. And we'll talk about the next president later in the talk. So Obama starts out with a relatively peaceful period between Taiwan and China, Taiwan, and the United States. But we all shared this common fate, which was a financial crisis that affected both a challenge for both the United States and for China. And this is a picture of Obama. The man on the left is Hu Jintao. He is the president of China, prime minister from 2002 to 2012. So he had a 10-year run. There's 2 5-year terms. And he was he's a bureaucrat. It was a golden period when we were in China. They didn't really, they encouraged foreigners. They wanted investment. And they were trying to develop the economy and not too much nationalism. And their relationship between Hu Jintao and Obama was marked by pragmatism. They cooperated on climate change and global finances. But there were tensions over trade, cyber security, military power that signaled the beginning of a more competitive relationship between our 2 countries. Because China was growing economically and feeling much more powerful and that they could flex their muscles. And people characterize the relationship between our 2 countries during this period of time as a period of strategic distrust. But we weren't shooting at each other, at least, or threatening each other with naval engagements. Well, we faced a common enemy, That was the 2008 financial crisis. I'm sure we all remember that in some way or another. In my case, Joan and I were living in China, and the economy completely came to a standstill. There was no business being done at all in late 2008. It's just really a remarkable period. And China spent $586 billion to avoid an economic collapse during this period of time. I was invited to a Chinese New Year party in early 2009, and all the major multinationals were there. I still remember the president of Siemens got up and gave a speech kind of pleading with the Chinese to launch this super stimulus program to get the economy moving. Siemens was at that time, probably still is one of the biggest companies in China, biggest foreign companies. So the Chinese did end up supporting the world economy, and this stimulus drove the world economy, and it sure made my numbers look a lot better. I was suddenly looked like I knew what I was doing in China because we were doing business again. So, and a new bird emerged on the horizon all over Shanghai, a new kind of crane. Every building had a crane on top of it. There was construction everywhere. They were building new high-rise buildings, they were building roads, they were building bridges. Just the whole country, new airports, the whole country was under construction. And the joke was that the crane is a new national bird of China. So, but there was increasing tension between the United States and China. And at this time, Obama was talking about militarily rebalancing our forces to the Asia-Pacific region. There's economic engagement with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There were different diplomatic efforts and promotion of values. So here's Obama out there trying to lobby for more influence, reassuring U.S. allies that we're here to stay and help you stand up to China. And you can see here's a picture of him with President Park on the left. That's the daughter of the first actually dictator of Korea, and she was the president of Korea for a period of time when overlapping with Obama. And Shinzo Abe of Japan is on the right. He was recently, not so recently anymore, he was assassinated a couple years ago in Japan. So here's Obama meeting with them, trying to basically shore up an anti-China alliance. And the trouble is, Obama had baggage, and everybody knew it. The Americans had baggage, not just Obama. And that is, our military was stuck. We were stuck with problems in the Middle East, with the Iraq war, problems with Iran, and the Ukraine war was festering. And so we were busy, even though we wanted to do this so-called pivot to Asia. But that's what this cartoon's about. But people doubted our ability to pivot to Asia. So how much could they trust an alliance with the United States? Does that sound like a familiar theme? Can you trust the United States in an alliance?
Except the Europeans.
Make sure I don't spill this. So, so let's talk about a couple of these programs briefly. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was a big initiative under the Obama administration, really pushed by Hillary Clinton. Does anybody remember the term Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP? A couple of you do. Well, it was an alliance that included Pacific nations, not only in Asia, but also in the Americas. Peru and Chile were part of it, as well as the United States and Canada. It was basically going to be a Pacific NAFTA that would exclude China and be strong enough as an economic powerhouse to stand up to China. But it got caught up in the American election, and the author of the TPP was Hillary Clinton. She was running for president, and she renounced the TPP program in an effort to get elected. So that didn't go very far. It was signed in 2016 by everybody. It was never ratified, and it was ultimately a different version emerged, but the United States it's emerged today. I don't think it has much economic influence, and the United States is not part of it. Xi Jinping comes to power in 2012, and this changed everything. When we felt this, just living in China, we felt his influence pretty quickly. And I put this slide up before in some of my other presentations, because this is his proclamation as he's coming to power. He says the Chinese has ushered in a great leap. This references a great leap forward in the 50s. China was going to leap into from an agricultural economy into an industrial economy, to standing up. And standing up means standing up to the foreigners that had colonialized China in the late 1800s and 1900s. That's a reference to a speech by Mao Zedong in 1949, where he said the Chinese people stood up to getting rich, and that's a reference to Deng Xiaoping. If you remember him coming to the United States in the 80s, he complained it was okay to get rich. That was a change in the Chinese adoption of some kind of capitalism. And finally, to becoming strong, which is what Xi Jinping is pushing. The Chinese nation is going to become strong. He talks here the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. What he means by that is, I don't know if you realize, but there are Chinese people all over the Far East. Vietnam has a large Chinese population. Malaysia has by the largest Chinese population. Singapore has Chinese population. And of course, Hong Kong. And then he was going to assert control over Xinjiang, basically restore the old Qing Empire. So that was a rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. It's really declaring the imperial ambition of modern China. And it's entered into an irreversible historical process. This is his goal, and he's pledged that he wants to reunite Taiwan with China by 2027. That's only 2 years away. So that's the force that we're facing. I don't think he's lost his determination, but how he's going to do it, we'll see. He's got plenty of his own problems. So Obama and Xi Jinping meet and have a polite relationship. And you can see here there's a meeting in California. They cooperated on climate change. They talked a lot about currency manipulation. The United States always complained that the Chinese were adjusting their currency, which is called the renminbi, to control make it favorable exchange rate with the US dollar. And the cybersecurity was also an issue then, as it is now. And militarization of the South China Sea became a really big issue. We'll talk about that in the next couple slides. And the US responded with what's so-called freedom of navigation actions. So this is where it started leading to potential conflicts between the United States and China, where we have our Navy sailing into areas that the Chinese claim is their territory. And so far, nobody shot at each other, but we've had near-miss collisions of ships in the South China Sea. And she started this Belt and Road Initiative, whatever this thing is. The funniest name when I first heard of it, Belt and Road. What does Belt and Road mean? So,
Well, they're creating infrastructure in third world countries.
right, right. So let's talk a little about some of Xi's big initiatives. The first one is this so-called 9-dash line. This actually existed on nationalist Chinese maps at the end of 1945, but no one really tried to enforce it. But the maps were peeled out really at the end of Hu Jintao's regime, but Xi is what launched into it. And these are the 9-dash lines on this map: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And they claim everything in here belongs to China. Well, that's the South China Sea. That's the biggest, most concentrated shipping lanes in the world. That's where huge oil and gas resources are in the South China Sea, huge fisheries. And the trouble is the Philippines claims a lot of its territory. Some of their territory goes right into the international limits of the Philippines. They claim all this. Vietnam claims these islands over here, the Paracel Islands. And this led to all the other Asian countries being very upset. During the time that I was living in China, China started sending tourists out with passports with this map printed. These tourists arrived in Vietnam and they wouldn't let them in because of the maps. So this is the beginning of the conflict, of this, I guess called conflict. Then China started militarizing coral reefs in the South China Sea. This is one of the first ones called Fiery Cross. And this is a satellite image, and they brought in dredging equipment, they pumped sand up, and they created basically fixed-based aircraft carriers. They put runways here, they have radars here, anti-missile equipment here, and they put a number of these up. They said they weren't militarizing them. They said they were for peaceful purposes to help with any shipping that might be in distress. And in 2016, the Philippines took Beijing to the Court of International Law on maritime claims, and the court ruled in favor of the Philippines, but the Philippines chose not to enforce it. The new president, Duterte, was trying to cozy up to China to get money from China. Duterte, by the way, now is the president of the Philippines. Is anybody following the news recently about him? He was involved in extrajudicial killings, and he's just got arrested in by the World Court, International Court, and he's now in The Hague being prepared for trial. Literally, he's the one that stopped trying to enforce this ruling by the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. Xi Jinping was in Washington. This is September 2015. Gave a speech. He denied turning these artificial islands into military assets, and everybody could see it from all kinds of satellite reconnaissance photos. So, but that, you know, there's no plausible deniability here. It was a fact that this is what they were doing. Then the Belt and Road Initiative was launched, and this is during the time that we were in China, and I first heard, I really didn't understand what it meant, because the Chinese were building high-speed railroads around China that travel basically passenger trains 140 miles an hour or so, and really fantastic change in where you could get around China. And they're probably the leaders of that really in the world at this point. And that vision was they were going to build rail lines across Central Asia and to bring shorten transportation distances for international goods. Now, the word in Chinese for the Belt and Road is Yi Dai Yi Lu, which means one belt, one road. It just seemed very strange to us, but I guess I would compare this, as the gentleman over here said, to the USAID programs where they were putting money into different countries to bring in, loaning them, and then bringing in Chinese investments. So as I learned more about it in my business, since we were a Chinese company and we were manufacturing in China and we had Chinese business partners, we qualified as a Chinese company. Suddenly we were getting business in places we'd never done business before. I spoke here about Africa a couple of years ago. We did a lot of business in Africa. We did huge projects in Brazil, and we did projects in the Middle East, and these were all part of One Belt, One Road, Belt and Road, just like the American AID. At the beginning of my career, a lot of projects I did were funded by AID. As you know, AID is pretty much finished now. You've been following the news under the Trump 2.0. But now, Belt and Road is everywhere, all over the world. And you can see here, and also they invested in ports. Ports of Singapore, Colombo in Sri Lanka, Mombasa in Somalia, Piraeus in Greece, even trying to invest in Rotterdam. And they were investing in this port in Panama that I talked about at the beginning of my talk. So that was all Belt and Road money that was going into that. And just basically promoting, extending Chinese influence around the world. And that's still a factor that's backed off a little bit because I think they run into economic problems. The loans are not performing, they're not getting paid back the way they hope to. But it's still a major force of influence. And they also started what's called the Asian Infrastructure Bank. That's a competitor to the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. It started in 2015. And they got a lot of countries, including a lot of Western countries, to join up. Our country pressured our allies not to join the AIIB, but our allies did. Like England is a member of the Asian International Development Bank. This is a bank operating in Chinese currency rather than US dollar. This is potentially displacing the role of the US dollar in the world economy. This is all renminbi loans. Renminbi is a Chinese currency. It's growing to have 100 member countries in this bank, so it's a powerful influence for international development. At a time when we're pulling back from our international development, they're expanding it. And it's a multilateral development bank, and it's often linked to Belt and Road Initiative programs. This is where the money comes from for these programs. Well, the Obama administration came to an end, as you know, and Hillary Clinton was defeated, and we now have Trump 1.0 in 2016. And that's what is the first thing he did? He canceled the Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty. That is, we never signed that treaty. That had been ratified, but we never signed it. And we had a new gun in town in Taiwan. And there have been a lot of problems in Hong Kong during this period of time. And China was preaching one country, two systems. That was the pitch to the Hong Kong people. Unite with us, we'll all be under China. You can have your own democratic system. Well, that came to an end during this time. The Taiwan people became very alarmed. And who comes in power along with this from the Democratic Progressive Party? That's their symbol versus the National Party. And Tsai Ing-wen is her name, and she was kind of a firebrand. And she she was elected right before Trump was elected, and she's pushing for Taiwan independence. But she can't say it too loudly, but that's what her agenda is. And she called Trump up right after he was elected to congratulate him. Well, that's like the head of one state calling the head of another state to congratulate him on his job. That's not her job. She's, remember, just the governor of a province of Taiwan, not the president. The president of the country of Taiwan. The Chinese were infuriated by that. And Trump pushed for an enhanced diplomatic relationship with Taiwan just to offend the Chinese and use it kind of as a negotiating leverage. And there was also a strengthening of defense relationships during this time. Well, Trump blasted Taiwan for a while, China for a while, telling them how bad they were. And after eventually, though, he invited Xi Jinping and his wife, Peng Liyuan, who's a very famous military song folk singer in China, to a dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and everybody's very happy at the dinner. It was a candlelight steak dinner in Mar-a-Lago. I think there's important analogies to watch what's going on here. If you notice that Trump's blasting Canada, blasting Mexico, blasting Panama, he came right out of the gate swinging, blasting Europe, but who isn't he blasting?
China.
Yeah, he did. He's not blasting Russia. He wants Russia to sign a peace treaty with Ukraine. He's not really blasting China. I think he's saving that. That's going to come. That's going to be one of my themes as we go through this in the next couple slides. So I believe he's holding his fire now on China, and you'll see why I feel that way. So while this dinner is going on, the trade deficit between the United States and China is growing to about $350 billion. They sell us $350 more than we buy from them. So it's kind of, I looked at this research before I came here in final preparation of this talk. It's kind of stayed the same between our two countries, although you see in the later slide it's grown on a world basis. So they are very strong, and all Trump's policies really did not change the basic trade deficit. So finally, in March 2018, I remember the dinner, the famous dinner with the candlelight dinner was 2017. Finally, so it took him a while to get around to going after China. He was giving everybody else a hard time first. But in 2018, he put in 25% tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods. So this is a picture of a typical White House signature signing ceremony. And I'll put an ad in for my own company. In my opinion, one of the bad guys in this photo is this guy right here. His name is Wilbur Ross. He's Secretary of Commerce. Also owns major U.S. steel companies like Armco. These guys make all the high-grade electrical steel for transformers, and they were jacking our prices up left and right once this thing went in several rounds. He's one of the main beneficiaries. This company is one of the main beneficiaries of these tariffs. The same thing's going to happen in this current round. These tariffs are going to raise the price, and all you're going to see is the domestic suppliers raise their prices. It's going to be very highly inflationary and hurt a lot of local manufacturers. Just as a pitch, I already complained to Ron Johnson. Says, I don't know how much Ron Johnson and I have in common, but I said we both have manufacturing backgrounds, and we know what these tariffs are going to do to industry in Wisconsin. It's very serious. Well, Trump met with Xi Jinping the following December. So this was in March, December. They met at a G20 meeting in Buenos Aires, and they said they'd wait 90 days before imposing more tariffs, another 25% tariffs. Sound familiar? Meanwhile, we started putting a lot of pressure on a Chinese telecommunication company called Huawei. We basically tried to sink the company. We blocked all exports to Huawei of critical technologies. And Huawei is still strong. They've emerged as a leader in telecommunications in, of all places, Africa. It's all Huawei. So this is their answer to our to Apple and Google and so on. But Huawei is making penetrations into Europe, and we forced the European allies, in Germany and UK among others, not to buy Huawei telecommunications equipment. We were concerned that they would get into controlling the infrastructure, be a national security risk. Well, eventually in 2020, Trump and China reached a deal. Modest deal where they would, where the Chinese agreed to purchase $200 billion in agricultural goods. And this picture, I find this picture kind of amazing because this is Liu He. He's a classmate of Xi Jinping. In China, if you're a classmate, that's how business is done. It's called guanxi relationship. And if you were if you had relationships as a kid in school somewhere with somebody, you only do business with people you really trust. That's how business is done in China. They're both called princelings. That means both their fathers were key figures in the Chinese Revolution. The children of Chinese revolutionaries are called Taizerling, in Chinese is a word, and they have a lot of influence in Chinese policy. What I found really I really didn't like this picture. I really felt sorry for Liu He, because this is a humiliating picture to him. If you're a Chinese person looking at this is a Chinese being humiliated by Western people, I guarantee you that this was perceived very negatively by Chinese people as being a real put down. He was basically forced with gunpoint to sign this agreement. And supposedly they were going to buy $200 billion of agricultural goods. But what happened next? They never bought the goods. What happened next? That's what I thought I heard. Yeah, COVID-19 shut down the world. So the Chinese got out of having to do anything. Trump was distracted, to say the least, and he started using the racially charged epithet Kung Flu. June 2020 was the first time he used that. And of course, they didn't like that. I guess there's still controversy how COVID-19 started. And I don't know the answer if you're looking to me for an answer. Meanwhile, Hong Kong is devolving into a very unstable situation. It started with the Umbrella Revolution in, I think it was 2012 or 2014, but then expanded with these treaties that were extraditing Hong Kong citizens to mainland China that were criticizing mainland China. So much for the two systems, one country formula. And the Taiwan people were really alarmed by this. Multinationals were backing out of Hong Kong. It's just not the same place it was. It's a major trading center in the world. And who gets elected, re-elected to a second term? Tsai Ing-wen. The person the Chinese don't want to get elected, they probably had more to do with her election than anything else by cracking down in Taiwan, or in Hong Kong. So she was re-elected. Everybody's all fired up. Even the KMT said they were going to stop their Beijing-friendly policies. So this is a big, big change. And young voters, they want to be part of Taiwan. They don't want to be part of mainland China. They watched what happened to their fellow Chinese people in Hong Kong. So she is a real firebrand, and people and the Chinese do not like her at all. Meanwhile, Blinken comes in as a Secretary of State. He's first out of the box. He blasts China in his first phone call with the Chinese. This is during the COVID epidemic. But they did, the Biden administration kept the Trump tariffs. Then they started a policy of creating alliances around Asia. So they went the opposite way of Trump. They started focusing on alliances. The big one was, there's an alliance that's been around for a while called the Quad. United States, Japan, India, and Australia. It was kind of a sleepy alliance. So Biden started re-energizing that. This is in March 21 at conferences, and they tried to get other countries to join in this alliance, which is basically focused on containing China. And then the coup de grace for all the Chinese aggressiveness in South China Sea was this treaty called AUKUS. Have you heard of this treaty, AUKUS? A for Australia, UK, United Kingdom, England, and US. Well, the United Kingdom and the United States have a long-term cooperation in building nuclear submarines, and they brought Australia into the deal, where Australia canceled a submarine contract with the French, which were diesel submarines, which are very noisy and cannot stay underwater very long, with these United States British nuclear submarines, which are very quiet and can stay underwater for a long time. So you can park a nuclear submarine off the coast of China. It's very hard to detect. Well, this really frightened the Chinese, because this is the response. You know, they brought it on themselves, as near as I can tell. But this has got a couple years to go. I don't know if Trump is going to touch this or not. I really don't know. We'll see. But Biden then started a whole series of alliances around East Asia. So he started first meetings with the leaders of South Korea and Japan. The two countries have a lot of animosity going back to World War II and before, and brought them together into this informal alliance against China. They're both very concerned about China. Then he went to India. India had border skirmishes in the last few years with China. Brought them into alliance against China. He brought Vietnam into alliance with China, our former enemies in Vietnam. Really never feared the Chinese a lot more than they ever feared the Americans. This is Bongbong Marcos. This is the son of Ferdinand Marcos. They made a deal in the Philippines. We started bringing in U.S. forces are now stationed back in the Philippines. They were expelled some years ago from the Philippines. They're now back in the Philippines. Remember, the Philippines is only about 80 miles from Taiwan, the northern tip of the Philippines. This AUKUS agreement I talked about, and the Quad with Australia, and even the South Pacific Islands have started forming treaties with these guys. So does this look like we're trying to contain China? The Chinese might feel that way. You can certainly see how they might feel that way. So these are alliances. I don't know what Mr. Donald Trump's going to do about these at all. It remains to be seen. So things are pretty tense between China and the United States. Biden and Xi Jinping have a relationship that goes pretty far back. So Biden tried to call Xi Jinping. This is a time where people weren't traveling because of COVID. They started trying to reestablish a little friendlier relationships between our two countries. It was almost a year without us talking to each other. And this is now November 21. And Xi Jinping warns of Cold War divisions as U.S. rebuilds alliances. It's really it was done remarkably fast. I think it was quite effective as a foreign policy. Again, it was sort of a NATO for the Pacific. And this is really one of my big questions to you guys, which I hope you'll answer later. What's going to happen next? So then we sent a guided missile into Taiwan in the form of Nancy Pelosi. Well, she's not just the Speaker of the House, she's also the third person in line for a succession in the United States government. So she's a really high-level U.S. Official that we said there's only one China. We sent her to visit. It'd be like sending her to Wisconsin without checking with Washington. So she goes in there. She's only there for about 24 hours to visit Tsai Ing-wen. And it was just a very symbolic visit. The Chinese were enraged by this. And the next day, they completely blockaded Taiwan by air and sea. This is up to now, all their missions have stopped at this median line between the two countries. They started having live fire exercises all around Taiwan. They started shutting off the airport to Taiwan. This is right after she flew out. And some of these exercises continue to this very day. So here we go. And then Biden says that the U.S. would defend Taiwan. Now, what was strategic ambiguity? Remember that? He said, we may defend you, we may not. And here he goes, 3 times in that year of 2022, Biden said we would defend Taiwan, and then Blinken or his officials walked it back. Will we or won't we? This really shocked a lot of people when he broke the silence on that. And our Senate, which is very pro-Taiwan, at least it was, I don't know what it is today, approved large weapons sales to Taiwan to try to keep make it very hard for the Chinese to invade Taiwan. And we started blocking all kinds of technology exports to Taiwan, like these NVIDIA, this thing that at least I never heard of until about a year ago, these high-performance AI chips. And we went on to all our allies and got them to block technology exports to Taiwan. So here we are, we're coming now to the contemporary period. Tsai Ing-wen's term ended in 2024. This is the end of her term. And a new guy came in. His English name is William Lai, or Lai Ching-da in Chinese. He is the new president of Taiwan. He's also part of the DPP. He's also a very big mouth separatist. The Chinese detest the guy. they invited this guy Ma back to China. He met with Xi Jinping recently. They see him as a peaceful alternative for Taiwan. He looks pretty good in hindsight to the Chinese. But this is a new president. He's been pretty circumspect, kept his mouth shut, because it's pretty dangerous right now. So he's the new president of Taiwan. Donald Trump won the last election, as some of you may know. And Biden met with Xi in November, and Xi said he'll be glad to work with Trump again. And I think he knows how to handle Trump, really, just how to play him. So we're coming now to the contemporary times. The Chinese the trade deficit with the world, not just the United States, is going to $1 trillion. Annual trade deficit. China exports $1 trillion more than they buy. And William Lai, his first thing out of office, he said Taiwan is going to do a lot of investment in the United States. That's to appease Donald Trump. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, is the leader in all these chip manufacturing. They make the NVIDIA chips. They're going to they're already building a factory in Phoenix. Under Biden started, they're going to expand that. And he's trying to assuage Trump's concerns. Trump's actually boasted about the Taiwan investment going in Arizona. So they're playing Trump. Everybody's trying to please Trump. And then guess what? Donald Trump hits China with a bunch of tariffs, Mexico, China, and Canada. This is very recently. This is February news headline. And China imposed a retaliatory tariff. So it's tit for tat. Here we go. So I guess I'd like to kind of end by summarizing what I told you so far this evening, what I presented this evening. So if we look at the beginning of my talk, we had Obama in power, we had Hu Jintao, we had Ma Ying-jeou. Ma was in Taiwan. Obama was for basically, he supported the one China policy, and he was basically keeping a containment of China. Hu Jintao was for the peaceful rise of China. He wanted political stability and economic growth. He was a bureaucrat. If you remember the China conference, the Communist Party conference about 1.5 years ago, he was sacked by Xi Jinping in public. You remember he was escorted out of the meeting? This is the guy that he escorted. Can you imagine? Can you imagine us escorting Trump escorting Biden out of a meeting? Yeah, I guess I could imagine that. So, and then Ma Ying-jeou was in charge, and he was for one China. He was genuinely for one China. Just peaceful reunification. Well, Obama came forward with the pivot to Asia. Xi Jinping consolidated power. He talked about this China dream of a greater China nation. He talked about an anti-corruption campaign, which was directed at corruption. It was also, conveniently, all the people that were being arrested for corruption were all his political rivals. So he got them out of the way. And he was for the Belt and Road and Asian Infrastructure Bank. Then Trump's elected in 2016. He was big on America first. Guess we've heard that before. Tariffs. He's against alliances. We have Tsai Ing-wen. She's for an independent Taiwan. Biden comes in. He's for alliances. I mean, we're getting kind of confused this way and that way. But he did keep Trump's tariffs. He's definitely has been focused on containment. And he says he supports the one China policy. He slipped a couple of times, 3 times a year and a half ago, and said he would support Taiwan. And technology restrictions, and again, trying to keep strategic ambiguity alive. So now we have the contemporary Xi Jinping. What's he going to do? We have Trump. What's he going to do? And we have William Lai. What's he going to do? I don't know. There's some books you can read if you want to dig deeper. So coming to the end of my talk, but these first 2 books are really good books on Taiwan. This is the history of Taiwan. This book talks more of the contemporary issues and how a war could innocently start between the United States and Taiwan, China over Taiwan. This was just very recently published. Well, all these are pretty recent. This is very recently. And this book is by Kevin Rudd. He was the Prime Minister of Australia. He was then the ambassador from Australia to the United States. He was then president of the Asia Institute. He's a China scholar. He studied in China as a college student. He speaks fluent Mandarin. He's had a lot of personal engagements with Xi Jinping. And he put his ideas on how to avoid a war. And finally, this book by Susan Shirk. She's at the University of San Diego, and she's a China scholar. She calls it overreach. And her admonition to the Chinese is don't overreach, don't grab too much. And her admonition to the Americans, us, is don't overreact. That's the summary of her book. Got that? Okay. So back to my question at the beginning, which I hope we can have a short discussion about. You know, should we decouple from China? Should we end strategic ambiguity? Should we work to influence the CCP? Should we just say things are stuck the way they are? And what will Trump's policies be going forward? Yes.
Can I ask you a quick question about the talk here?
Yes.
And then one comment. I guess I'll give you a comment first. With the selling the arms to Taiwan,
yes.
There was a big announcement that we're going to sell all this arms to Taiwan.
Right.
And I read the paper every day about different things, and they were talking about we won't be able to supply any of that this year even because the arms manufacturers are so far behind, and we're not, at least what they said in the.
Because of Ukraine?
Yeah.
And Israel? Yeah.
Well, Ukraine, Israel, and we're replenishing NATO supplies and our own. But that was just a comment on. The other thing was when Trump came in the first time, he said he threw this 25% tax on China, and your costs went up being manufacturing in China, I guess. But that didn't cause any inflation in the United States.
Well, I wasn't in China at that time.
Oh.
And I came back in 2015. I was in China from 05 to 15. But if you were manufacturing in China, there was a problem. In our business's case, we were making it in China and and selling it mainly in China or to near neighboring countries.
I was just right. It didn't cause inflation.
But I think in the United States, what happened is most of the Chinese manufacturers, the Chinese government adjusted the currency to reduce the impact of it and to make the currency weaker. And they also, the manufacturers absorbed a lot of the cost of the tariffs. So that's why it was not a major impact. And then COVID really shook things up because we found out how dependent we are on China for simple things like medical, like rubber gloves or medical supplies. Yeah. Yes?
Well, I think we shouldn't decouple from China, but the thing is, aren't all these countries wanting a strong economy for themselves? I mean, everybody's got their own view of what would work best for their country, and they want to keep as much as possible, right? So it really will never quite change, will it? It just goes back and forth depending on who's president of each country and what their beliefs are.
Yeah, it's hard if you're in business if you can't plan more than a couple of years ahead. Your costs are going to change, supply chains are going to change so radically. That's really the challenge now.
And my other concern is, I like a democracy, and I would like Taiwan to stay a democracy. But I think if China gets involved, it won't be. I mean, over time, that democracy will slowly be eroded.
So the question is how, does everybody understand the comment, you would like Taiwan to remain a democracy? And my question is, how much, I guess we all want to think, how much do we really want Taiwan? How much are we willing to sacrifice to keep Taiwan a democracy? Are we willing, and that's what this book is about, this why Taiwan matters. Are we willing to go to war to keep with China to keep Taiwan a democracy?
10 years of war, 15 years, right?
Nuclear war.
Yeah, well.
He's built up a massive nuclear capability. It won't be a long war. It'll be an incredibly violent war. It won't be a war confined to foreign shores. It will affect the United States in a significant way. They've developed all kinds of intercontinental missiles. They developed missiles that can take out our ships. It'll be like no other war we've been involved in. Are we willing to do that? I mean, they have their own weaknesses too. They have their own, it's not a one-sided thing.
So do you think that they would actually use them? Because it sounds like a recipe for a Pyrrhic victory.
Well,
whoever uses them.
Will we use them?
Well, that's the question.
That's the question. Well, these things have a way of getting out of control.
Yeah,
That's the problem. That's exactly, this book has a whole chapter on, this book here has a whole chapter on a simulation of how it might get out of control. It's scary. It's very real.
I mean, I think that it wouldn't, the chance that it wouldn't is infinitesimally small.
Yeah, and that's the risk. I mean, everybody has to, hopefully cooler heads will prevail or will disengage. I think Trump's waiting. Now he's cleaning up cleaning up's the right word, getting his other challenges out of the way before he takes on China.
Just a question, do you think Xi Jinping loses face if he doesn't attack Taiwan before 27 or before 28? And how does he save face?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Because he said
that's
by 27 we will have incorporated Taiwan.
exactly right. That's 2 years away, right?
Isn't it true that Taiwan still has a claim on mainland China?
Yeah. Well, they own islands off the shores of the mainland. They claim they don't have, and they own islands there within.
I think it's our best interest to keep them divided like South Korea and North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So the only problem, of course, is if they do if they do float a fleet across that little strait over there, that could get messy.
Well, what's the downside if we don't defend Taiwan?
If we don't defend Taiwan, what is the downside?
Yeah.
Every other ally that we have in that region will say, oh, well, if you aren't going to defend them, then we're not going to depend on you, like Korea.
But the U.S. is fairly dependent on Taiwan for certain infrastructure for our own military. I mean, we are a very electronic country now, and a lot of the chips that we use are manufactured in Taiwan. And that's the problem is China has stolen American industrial power through its trade imbalance with the U.S. And
spying. They're big time spying.
well, but we don't have a shipbuilding industry in this country anymore. Our steel industry has collapsed to one or two companies. We don't produce any aluminum anymore. 80% of our aluminum comes from Canada, and the next 8 countries don't even equal what Canada gives us in aluminum. We have tremendous natural resources, but our ability to convert natural resources to hard goods is gone. It's just gone. We are, today, they were just talking on several of the stock programs how we are a service economy. We are no longer an industrial commodity country. Well, if you're going to go to war or you're going to protect your allies, and we're a naval country because we're surrounded by water, if we can't produce ships and we can't produce military goods, then how are we going to defend either ourselves or our allies? And that's a really huge problem. And it's not going to be rectified in 4 years. It'll take 10, 20 years to rebuild the shipbuilding. If we wanted to build ships, we don't have a workforce that knows how to do it anymore. If you want to produce chips in this country, we don't have a workforce that knows how to do it. That's why Taiwan Semiconductor is having a hard time in Phoenix, because there's nobody in the Americas that know how to produce the chips that they produce. And they wanted to bring their people over, and Arizona said, no, we don't want them here, we want our own people. Well, there's a real recipe for success.
Okay, so we have a strategic interest then in keeping Taiwan.
Absolutely, we do.
To the point where we might be willing to start shooting.
We're in a real difficult place because our Navy has diminished tremendously, and the weapons that we have that would defend Taiwan would be exhausted in about a week and a half of fighting. And then what happens?
Your weapons will probably be exhausted also. We'll all be exhausted. It'll be over in a week.
Well, it depends on if, I agree with you that it could rapidly escalate into a nuclear exchange, which would be bad for both countries. China would say, we've got 1.4 billion, you've got 300 million. The difference is Chinese population is heavily concentrated on the coast. The US population is pretty diverse and spread out. So there are challenges for both countries. We don't want to have to face any of those challenges.
Have you been to China?
Pardon me?
Have you been to China?
No, I haven't. I actually fear the Chinese Communist Party. They are too willing to grab somebody and make up a trumped up charge and hold them for whatever reason.
We survived for 10 years and had a pretty good time.
I know you do, but there's plenty of Canadian and other nationals who have just been arrested and held for long periods of time.
Actually, I think that's one of the real casualties of this relationship that started under Trump and Xi Jinping in 2000. When we first came back here, we were really immersed in China. I mean, I was speaking Chinese as often as I was speaking English by that time. And we had a big adjustment. And I used to go down to UWM. I'd ride the bus for various reasons. I'd meet all these UWM Chinese students. I befriended them, and then they'd invite me out to dinner and so on. There was a lot of dialogue between Americans and Chinese. Now all these Chinese students left before COVID or during COVID. There's hardly any Chinese students now at UWM. Doug Savage was here last week, I think. Oh, he was somewhere. He told me that majority of students at UWM now are from India. So we don't have any we don't know each other, and that's good. So we develop suspicions of each other. I really like the Chinese people. We had a wonderful experience in China. I think they're super people, and God, I hope there's no war.
You didn't comment on Xi Jinping's modification of Chinese law to extend his presidency, which, as I understand it, was he was able to pass something.
Yeah, he's entered his third term now. There's 5-year terms.
But didn't they have a law prior to that he could only have 2 terms? And then he's modified that.
There was an amendment of the Constitution.
And he's got some political
basically, the expectation is he'll be for life, which is not a good situation either. If you can see in these photos, he's aged a lot in these photos.
He's getting to be an old man.
Well, I'm stuck with all of us.
But he has some political opposition within China as well.
No, he's neutralized his opposition. I was at a dinner. I was at a wedding around 2014 or 15 before I came home. And my partner's weddings are a big deal in China. Like weddings in all countries, you invite all your business friends and so on. And I was there just normal people, and I didn't see any of the political figures that I usually would run into at these kind of events. And so my partners signaled me and said, "Rick, come here." They took me out to the side door to a private elevator, went up to the top floor. I walked in. This is at the beginning of Xi Jinping. I guess this is probably 2014. And I saw all these government officials that I knew from Ningbo, that's the area that I was working in. They were all drunk as a skunk, eating big crab dishes, all this expensive seafood. And hey, Rick, how you doing? Have a drink. We're all toasting each other. And they started coming. And I understood, that's how I understood how Chinese didn't know what was going on. They were all complaining about Xi Jinping. Because the anti-corruption campaign was cracking down on things like this, exactly this, these lavish banquets, and cracking down on all their influence. And I'm sure most of them got pushed out in one way or another. I was surprised how loose their lips were. But anyway, it's part of my adventures. Yes, Jim.
A year or two ago, Biden's security advisor, Jake Sullivan, wrote an essay in Foreign Affairs. And he talked about de-risking, not decoupling.
Right.
And I think the Biden administration followed that.
Right.
They followed Trump in some security matters, technical stuff and so forth. And I think our companies now with the status, our U.S. companies are starting to de-risk a bit by looking at other world, because of the Asian flu as well, other sources. But I would argue against decoupling, because China needs us as much as we need them for economic purposes. And they have their own economic issues too. And there's no reason to rile them up. We may as well get along as peaceably as we can and try to build our own resources.
Yeah, we really have a codependent relationship. The problem is there's this player here is kind of a wild card in the relationship, what he's gonna do and how our Congress is gonna react to it. I mean, you've heard of the China lobby, has anybody heard that term? This is from World War II, really, you ever hear of Luce, what was Luce's first, Edward Luce? Henry Luce, ever hear of Henry Luce, the founder of Time magazine? He was the son of missionaries in China, and he promoted Christian China and Christianity in China, and he's really behind why the United States government supported the National Party all the way through to 1949. Truman had it with Chiang Kai-shek and had it with nationalists. They saw them as just incredibly corrupt, which they were. And the so-called China lobby, which was in the Congress, it was manipulated by Chiang Kai-shek's wife, Song Mei-ling, and she was educated in the United States, and she spoke perfect English and could write in English, and she would write articles in Time magazine and other newspapers. And the influence on the so-called China lobby is around to this day in the United States Congress. Basically, talking about the evils of communism and the anti-Christian nature of communism. There's a lot of people in the United States that want to keep Taiwan the way it is. And I'm not sure if it's anachronistic. It's a different time now.
I think what we, I feel pretty secure that Trump operates by a diplomacy that he's going to keep his friends close, but he's going to keep his enemies closer. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he's going to rile Putin, and I don't think he's going to do anything with China because he knows that China is in bed with Russia, and that would be our demise. So
the theory I had, and I don't know if it's valid or not, is that he's trying to make a deal with Putin to peel Putin away from China. So he isolates China, kind of reverse Nixon. Kissinger went to China and separated China. China was having difficulties with Moscow, and the wedge was the United States and China aligned against Moscow. Now I'm envisioning a potential situation with the United States and Russia aligned against China as potentially going forward. We'll see. See, that's why I think he's taken this delicate approach that he's taking with China now. It's curious to me that he...
And isn't it like a culture war between Taiwan and China? Because these civilizations, like the Middle East, they go back thousands of years that we don't, it's not a real...
Chinese culture really didn't exist in Taiwan in a big way until the 20th century. It all came from mainland China. As I said, the original settlers were Austro-Asians, Austro-Pacific people. They're not Chinese people. Chinese people started coming there during the Ming Dynasty. They started coming there for various reasons. It was an outlaw colony, kind of. It was considered a real nuisance by the Chinese. Eventually, they absorbed it into China as its official province around 1880. So it's only recently part of China. Then in 1895, it was separated from China and became part of Japan.
So, given that, why are the Chinese so insistent that they need to have control of it if it really wasn't part of their culture until the 1600s?
And even later. Why? Well, first of all, their arch enemies, the Kuomintang, the nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek fled there, so their enemies are all there. Number one. Number two, remember the slide I showed you?
Long memories is what you're saying.
Well, still part of it. They view it as part of China. Then they had this historical anger. In 1895, there was a Sino-Japanese war, which the Chinese got clobbered. And part of this treaty was that the Treaty of Shimonoseki in Japan, where the treaty was that Taiwan was made part of Japan. It remained part of Japan until 1945, when we took over Taiwan, and then we put it on the Republic of China. And then Chiang Kai-shek, he'd only been there one time, once before 49. He went there like in 1948 to look it over, and that became the base to fight mainland China. So there's been involvement. It goes back to the 1600s. There's a lot more books I can send you to read if you want to read about the earlier period. Well, this one book, the first book on Taiwan, the history book, the first one talks a lot about those early years. That'd be a good one to read. So I think Jennifer's gonna try to make them available in the library.
I'm sure they are.
Huh?
They are in the system.
They're in the system, so,
And I think China also wants to control the South China Sea,
yeah,
and they
all the
want to control the
resources.
Panama Canal.
And I showed you how strategic Taiwan is. It's, you know, it's equidistant from Taiwan. Taiwan is equidistant from the coast of China, equidistant to Japan, equidistant to Philippines. So it's in a very strategic location.
And
So,
they're also using Greenland. That passageway that goes, the Russian and Chinese boats are using that Greenland Strait, and that's why President Trump is trying to get some control up there, because that would block off.
he's supposed to put a Mar-a-Lago north up in Greenland. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what do you think about the Chinese Navy conducting military exercises down by Australia?
What do I think? I'm glad you brought that up. As everybody, if people aren't aware, the Chinese had several naval vessels circling the continent of Australia as we speak. It's got the Australians kind of shook up. Well, I think it's a reaction to the AUKUS treaty, don't you? Every action has a reaction. And the Pacific Islands have been contested between China and Australia.
Yeah, Solomon.
Yeah.
The AUKUS treaty is very provocative on America's part.
Sure
I
it
mean,
is.
it was a dagger pointed right at China,
Absolutely.
so you can understand why they're so upset.
Who came up with that idea?
I think it was everybody.
Well, it was during the Biden administration. I think his team came up with it.
We can't keep antagonizing, you know,
Well, it's
because
a reaction to being antagonized by the Chinese. The Chinese, I deliberately left out a lot of slides that show all the Chinese provocations, so I wanted to leave time for discussion. So I have a bunch of slides that I could have had in here originally with more talking about all the provocations in the South China Sea. They've been very provocative, which gets to that book, Overreach. That's a good book to read.
China has a lot of internal problems right now.
Absolutely.
Their population is aging and declining.
Yes.
They have tremendous poor debt, if it's non-performing debt, if you will, with the housing problems.
Right.
They overbuilt their housing to a large extent. They have a bubble in their stock market. So they have a lot of internal problems.
And Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign, guess who it's been directed at? The equivalent of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There's been a lot of people, very senior military, accused of being taking bribes that he's been sacking on a regular basis. So how much can he trust his own military? So they got plenty of their own problems. We all got problems, and they got theirs.
He's charged his military with being prepared to invade Taiwan in 2 years.
And all his generals are taking payoffs as they build the get orders for the equipment.
Are they like the Russian generals and telling him what he wants to hear and not necessarily what's really going on?
Maybe.
yeah, but look at all their smiley, happy faces. They're such happy people.
These are our fearless leaders that will tell our future. Yes, sir.
When you were in China, is communism
Attention library patrons,
now
the time is
as it was
7:45
years
and the library
way
will be
back
closing
when?
in 15
or
minutes.
has it gotten a
If
little?
you wish to check items out, we ask that you make your way to the checkout desk. Thank you.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Is when you were in China, is communism as strict as it used to be years ago, or are they kind of becoming a little more democratic? Or what signs of communist behavior did you see? I picture people fearing
None.
saying anything they shouldn't. None.
It's nationalism. It's one party control. The party. I look at it as Chinese history is told in periods by dynasty. So the most recent dynasty was the Qing dynasty. If you remember the movie The Last Emperor? Did you see that movie? That was the end of the Qing dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then before that there was the Ming dynasty. Before that, I can't remember what was the Yuan dynasty, and going back many dynasties for 2,000, 3,000 years. I look at the Chinese Communist Party as being the current dynasty. They joke with me about Marxism. My employees, they joke with me about. I can't remember some of the. They know all the story of Marxism. They learned it as kids under Mao, but not today. So.
I was working for a company in West Allis that was doing business in China, And I knew some of the engineers that were over there. One of them was over in Tiananmen Square when the shooting started. I remember reading when the people that, Chinese politicians that were in favor of opening up the country more, said to it, I can't remember the Chinese leaders at the time, but they said, you know, we have the people behind us. And they said, you have nothing, I have the military behind me.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much summed up the way they thought. They were just shooting people that were
It's
protesting.
a really interesting subject, the evolution of the Communist Party in China. But it's, you know, I've given some classes on it at OSHA. There's a lot of great books. If you want, I can suggest some to read before you part company.
When is your class at OSHA? Because I go to OSHA.
Oh, there's two classes. The first one's on Taiwan, and the second one's going to be a repeat of this. I think it's April 23rd and May 1st or something like that.
What's your sense of, do the Chinese want stable relations with the U.S.? What do the Chinese want?
The Chinese people or the Chinese government?
Chinese governments are sort of the ones that are going to call the shots.
Sure, they want stable relations, but just under their terms. They want Taiwan to be part of China, but they want to have the major influence in the East Asia. Right now, we're contesting that. Yes, another way to look at that is the expansion of the American empire. It's the way I look at it sometimes when I take the broad picture of U.S. history, expanded from 13 colonies to the Pacific Ocean. Then we annexed Hawaii. Then we had the Spanish-American War. We annexed the Philippines. We had Alice Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's daughter, made what was called a cruise on the China coast when there was a lot of anti-American demonstrations due to the Chinese immigration laws. So our empire extended all the way to the shores of the Pacific, and it was solidified by our victory in World War II. And now it's being pushed back by the Chinese. That's really the way I look at it. Big, 100, 200-year waves. It's being pushed back now, and it will probably be pushed back more. Find out sustainable we have. Maybe not, maybe in our lifetime, maybe not, I don't know. We would probably reluctantly just back away.
Do you have a percentage of how many American companies are actually in China now?
Everyone's there. Yeah. Somebody are trying to take in a swing, because this is a large market. So.
How does the Chinese government fund internal projects like roads and bridges and airports?
Well, they have really high taxes. I can tell you this: it's like 70% taxes on foreign earnings.
So income tax like on the individual or property tax?
They have a value-added tax on everything you buy. That's one of the big taxes that we see as consumers. We saw as consumers living there.
They have a $1 trillion surplus in trade, so
yeah.
That's a tremendous
That's
amount of
generating a lot of wealth
into China.
That's generating a lot of wealth. So
I have a question about fentanyl.
I'm not an expert on it. Don't use it.
I'm not
Go ahead.
suggesting you should. Should we trust the Chinese, as they apparently have promised, to curtail and interfere with those in China making precursors that wind up eventually in Mexico or a tiny smidgen of which goes to Canada, but later wind up in the U.S., which of course has the sucking sound to get it all, because we have so many people who use it and can afford it.
I don't know. I have to tell you, I'm really puzzled that fentanyl is such a big issue that they couldn't shut it down if they wanted to, which gets back to maybe they don't want to. Why? Are you aware of the opium wars?
Yeah, I know very well the history of opiates in China.
We drugged the whole China. We had 20 or 30% of the men in China were addicted to opium.
Yeah, and we banned opium dens in the U.S.
Right.
because the Chinese workers would come over to build a railroad, and we had all those yellow laws and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I understand the history. I'm just wondering at this point, can China be trusted to do anything substantive about it? Because I'm sure that he's strong enough, he could just put his thumb on it and wipe it out in an instant. It's not a huge, there's not a huge number of people, and you don't have to have Nobel Prize winning brains to make this stuff.
Well, obviously, I don't know the answer to that question. I would think they could have as much as they want to. China's like a very dispersed economy. It's very entrepreneurial. There's only a lot of these individual things going. So
For millennia.
lots of little people doing business here and there, trying to make a buck. Everyone in China's trying to make a buck. They're pretty hard-working people.
Yeah, you can make all the fentanyl that the US consumes, if you grow it from opium, on about 400 square miles.
Okay.
So all you have to do is have a little field here, a little there, and if you do it from raw products, you can make it in one warehouse.
And in the case of Mexico, is how much is it in their interest to help Trump? And that's what I think Claudia Sheinbaum, the new president of Mexico, is doing. And that's what her predecessor did, is they tightened immigration up to plead to get what they wanted out of the Americans. I think the Chinese will do the same thing. That'll be their response to, we're going to give you 25% tariffs. Well, we might just look the other way at fentanyl production, or look at the other way at illegal immigration. That's going to be what's going to be going on behind the scenes in the negotiations, I think. I don't know, I think.
And then an unrelated question. To what extent does the US business community have any influence in all this? Through imports, exports, alliances, and the like?
Well, just reading things on LinkedIn, people I know in China are raging about the tariffs, how counterproductive it is. So, they'll lobby with interest in trying to keep business going. The business community in China is under stress right now. It's definitely under stress right now. We know the Jones art teacher husband is the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. She keeps us informed of all this. He's always in the news, so she sends us news clips. And basically trying to keep American interests alive in China and continuing to do business. Well, I thank you all for coming. I'll turn it over to
Like I mentioned before, we won't have a program next week, but we will have one on March 26th with Pablo Toral. He'll be coming to talk about climate initiatives. So we hope to see you there. Thank you.
Is it in this room or some?
This room.